Hello.
Our story begins with not only a decision, but a disturbance. The Jedi throughout their lives were taught to remain cautious when sensing the future. Grandmaster Yoda, during one of Anakin's many examinations, foresaw a death through the Force. His grandstudent, Qui-Gon Jinn, would die on Naboo. In what form he wasn't really sure, but Yoda saw it. He could see shock welt up in the Jedi Master's face as he fell to the ground. By his side in his final moments was young Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's really all Yoda could see. It blinded him, which forced Master Windu to take a hold of the rest of Skywalker's tests. Yoda contemplated his visions, believing that, regardless of what he saw, he should not intervene. A Jedi needed to be with Queen Amidala regardless of Senator Palpatine's position inside the Senate. She was the key to protecting the independence of the people of Naboo. Yoda may have foreseen great darkness in young Skywalker's future. He decided that, in accordance to his vision, that Anakin would not be permitted inside the Jedi Order. They were not to return him to slavery in the Outer Rim, but he would not become a Jedi. Qui-Gon wasn't very pleased with this, as Yoda suspected he wouldn't be. But there was also an additional message that followed Yoda's rejection of Anakin. If the Queen opted for a return to Naboo, alert the High Council, and another pair of Jedi would be appointed to the mission. At this, Master Jinn questioned the motivations of the Grand Master, but yet, again, he remained shrouded in secrecy. Whatever Yoda felt or sensed was negative, and he was very wary about telling the sole individual most impacted by his vision. Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin left the chambers, and not a mention was made of Yoda's suggestions. It wouldn't be until the following 12 or so hours when, after being notified of Queen Amidala's decision to return to Naboo, that Qui-Gon contacted the Grand Master. Even though Master Jinn was displeased with the orders given out by Master Yoda, he was still very willing to communicate with him. It's one of the many reasons the High Council trusted Qui-Gon, because he spoke to them as if they were the authority, which Jinn treated with respect. Because of this new information, Yoda dispatched 2 different Jedi to Naboo to accompany Padme. At the same time, there was a change of plans regarding young Skywalker. Yoda wasn't testing anyone, nor was he challenging the will of the Force. He simply acted in accordance to the vision. Qui-Gon would die on Naboo, so he delayed that. Yoda's initial belief was that Skywalker would be the reason behind his death, not necessarily the cause of it, but just related, perhaps a misstep or something else. Yoda told Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin to stay on Coruscant, because Anakin's training would actually begin. Kenobi would become a knight, and the rest would be looked at extensively by the Grand Master. Whatever bubble of darkness surrounded this proclaimed chosen one had to be examined again. On the other side of this, Yoda sent Jedi Counselor Plo Koon and recently promoted Master Shaak Ti to Naboo to accompany the Queen. These 2 Jedi were close friends, individuals that distributed not only their capacity for negotiation, but their willingness to avoid conflict and find resolve. They were a far more capable duo of Jedi for this mission. Not to say Master Jinn and soon-to-be Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi were incapable, it's just that something felt wrong, and Yoda didn't want to take his chances with this. Fortunately for Padme and the 2 new Jedi assigned to the mission, the trip from Coruscant to Naboo was quite long, thus providing them plenty of time to acquaint themselves. Nothing special needed to transpire because it all pretty much went the same. Master Plo was the elder of the group, by well over a couple centuries, and Shaak Ti was just approaching her 30s. They allowed the natives of the planet of Naboo to create the strategy, and then they added their own inputs along the way to keep it safe for not just the Queen, but for as many of her guards and Gungans as possible. Then, of course, the assault on the city transpired. With Naboo guards laying siege to the droid forces inside the city, the 2 Jedi accompanied Padme through the royal hangar bay, and into confrontation with the Sith Assassin Qui-Gon spoke about encountering on Tatooine. As the 2 Jedi ignited their lightsabers, Padme was off to engage with a bundle of destroyer droids, and the Jedi then collided their blades with the Sith. For the first time in over a millennium, a Jedi Counselor encountered a Sith, and it was a fiery exchange. Shaak Ti weaved forward with wide and aggressive blows through Form 4, while the elder Plo Koon dominated Maul with his heavy-hitting strikes in Form 5. The Sith Assassin continued to back away, but the Jedi and their mastery allowed them to keep him from escaping. The massive plasma energy chambers just beyond the hangar bay were where he wanted to go, but they permitted him no opportunity to do so. With Maul fighting like a trapped animal, both Jedi moved into Form 3. Each were familiar with it, even though it may have not been their main form of combat. It was the perfect, nearly synchronized moment. It kept Maul away from landing any notable blows on their defenses, while also keeping him inside the hangar bay. Immediately as he tried to find his escape route, Shaak Ti shut him down, backing her saber through a reverse grip and awkwardly jabbing his saber into the ground. As he tried to counter with the other end of the staff, Plo's hulking strength cut under the blade, forcing both ends into either the wall or the ground and Maul off of his feet in the same move. It was a devastating strike, and almost upon instinct, the Sith assassin harnessed all of his energy and flung his hands outwards. The two Jedi slid back, and Plo charged in, but Maul was speedy and off of his feet immediately. The assassin slipped through a corridor as Plo told Shaak Ti to cut him off at the coming pass. She nodded and dipped into the other direction. But Plo, the moment he followed Maul into the corridor, realized he was the one that made a mistake here. The assassin hoped to split the two Jedi up, which did end up working because now he and Plo were isolated. Shaak Ti was still running through the other side of the hangar bay to where she thought she might intercept this assassin. Maul swung aggressively. Plo defended the strikes, using precise parries and undercutting his attacks with his readied defense. Maul hoped that by singling them out, that he'd have the advantage of a 1 versus 1, but even though he was trained by Sidious, he still had much to learn. His skills were beyond impressive for his age, but Master Plo, throughout Maul's fighting retreat, kept the Sith assassin pinned. There was no fight in the energy plasma chambers, no true slowdown to their engagement, just the constant swinging and collision of lightsabers. It all continued up until Maul got to his Sith infiltrator starship and quickly lifted off. Because of its awkward location, Master Plo easily lobbed a tracker onto the ship and turned the frequency on, using its encrypted code to get through the blockade and back to Coruscant, where inside the Jedi Temple, Masters of the Council could watch the tracker. For Plo and Shaak Ti, Maul might have escaped, but their mission was far from over. They had to help the Queen capture Nute Gunray and force the surrender of the Trade Federation, which would eventually come. But before it could, the Jedi on Coruscant were already moving in action. No one really knew what this tracker was for. All they knew was that Master Plo or Master T wanted someone apprehended that escaped from Naboo. So off Mace Windu, Yoda, and Yarael Poof went to the location of the tracker. Unfortunately for Maul, when he arrived at Sidious's lair inside the works, his master was not present. The Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine was inside the Senate Plaza doing his work, as the new Chancellor would be. This also meant that, unfortunately for Darth Maul, he would be inside the works for all the 5 minutes before the Jedi shuttle landed and 3 of the most powerful Jedi rushed out. Their lightsabers ignited into different shades of purple, green, and blue, and they demanded a surrender. Maul was able to recuperate inside the transport during the escape from Naboo, but he knew better than to try and fight these 3 Jedi. Instead, he turned his attention to the walls and the other rooms inside the works. He searched outwardly through the Force to see if his master was present and to see if this was a trick or not. Maul knew that the full power of Sidious, Plagueis, and himself would be enough to destroy this trio of Jedi. But alas, Sidious was not present, and Darth Plagueis the Wise was slain unbeknownst to him the night before in the celebration of Palpatine's election victory. Maul's saber dropped from his hands, and Master Yoda escorted the Zabrak assassin back to the temple. Mace Windu and Yarael Poof had an entire Sith lair to investigate on their own. Shaak Ti and Plo Koon back on Naboo had some trouble with forcing the Trade Federation to surrender, but in capturing Nute Gunray, they were able to get the battleship to shut down the battle droids and end the Gungan slaughter. Their transmissions and confirmation of victory that would be relayed to the temple accompanied the interrogations of Darth Maul deep inside the superstructure of the ancient Jedi building. Because of the sheer intensity of everything that had transpired, especially all as a result of Yoda's vision, the Jedi Council was extremely quiet about these revelations. Everything inside the temple and around the capital ramped up. Temple guards were more visible to the everyday eye. Police sentries were watching out for individuals who might be using the Force, and surveillance cameras around the city were activated by archivists inside the temple. everything was at maximum security because not only did the High Council learn that the Sith actually returned from the dead, but there was more than one of them. Interrogating Maul didn't provide them with any results, but the individuals who went to the works and scavenged the Sith lair discovered evidence of a Darth Plagueis and a Darth Sidious, though there was something inferred that the former of the two of them was now dead. There were a lot of passages inside one of the journals of Darth Sidious that spoke of Plagueis as if he had already died. This was by no accident. Sidious knew that at some point his master needed to fall. The plans just didn't truly manifest until he became Chancellor, but they were in the works for months. Additionally, the problems for the Jedi Council would amplify with the accidental capture of Master Dooku. Despite Qui-Gon Jinn surviving by not being involved with the engagement on Naboo, it didn't stop Dooku from removing Kamino from the archives and going to the restricted section. Being that he seldomly contacted his master, Yoda, and didn't humor the dramatics of the Council, he never even considered that they could have discovered Maul. As much as Dooku knew, there was so much more that he didn't, and unfortunately due to the relationship he currently had with Darth Sidious, he couldn't parade around their communicator. Tyrannus was meant to be born, but he couldn't be if he was apprehended by the Jedi. Sidious was almost caught by them, hiding inside of his lair, but he aborted course because of a Delta 7 Jedi starfighter that flew past him accidentally inside the industrial sector. Aside from the failure at Naboo, Sidious learned that Darth Maul was captured, but didn't know anything else. He stayed at his primary residence in Coruscant as the chaos brewed inside of his own lair. Fortunately for Palpatine, all of the documents related to his political rise weren't inside the works. Unfortunately, Master Dooku never checked his communication device and just randomly showed up at a High Council investigation location. Furthermore, everyone working on the project inside the works knew he wasn't involved. So despite how much the present members of the High Council didn't want to, they had to have him arrested and returned to the temple. He clearly didn't follow anyone to the works and happened to show up without any reasons behind why, which meant he could be a collaborator. To Sidious, this was the only thing that truly flew under the radar for him, because there was no way in knowing that Dooku was captured. Naturally, because Plagueis assisted with Tyrannus' recruitment, Palpatine assumed that Dooku betrayed the Sith following Plagueis' death. This from Palpatine was more paranoia than anything else. He at this point believed that he killed his own master, but he still questioned it. Plagueis was a very intelligent Sith, and from Palpatine's perspective at this very moment, it felt like his old master had a contingency set into place to destroy the Sith should he die. Members of the High Council couldn't infer that from the information they discovered inside the works. The Sith as an order were very lucky, to be honest, that more information wasn't present, but that didn't mean the Sith were safe. Dooku's capture was the real deal breaker for Palpatine's immunity. The Sith Lord could reside inside the Chancellor's mansion and never worry about a thing. Maul was a nobody. Nobody aside from Mother Talzin even knew he existed. Maul hardly even knew who he was himself. So to Palpatine, Maul was a risk he could take. He could be captured, tortured, and killed, and no real pressing information would come out of him. Dooku was a different story. He committed to the dark side, but he never actually joined the Sith. His lightsaber wasn't even bled yet, and now everything hinged on whether or not he broke. Well, he wouldn't need to. The High Council took everything with this Sith case very seriously. They had genuine proof of a long-established Sith foothold on Coruscant. The Sith were behind not only the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo, but the switching of influence inside the Galactic Republic. Everything related to the Federation, making the election relevant to their research. But surprisingly, the information discovered by the Jedi would not revolve around the new Supreme Chancellor. However, it revolved around a planet removed from the Jedi archives. Due to the intensive security inside the restricted section of the Jedi archives, the information that was deleted was genuinely lost to time. But the fact that data itself was deleted was not lost. In other words, Master Jocasta could, only 24 hours after Dooku's capture, go into the archives and check the databanks for any information that could have been deleted. She could then see that a planet in the Outer Rim was removed. With that information, she could simply check other relevant star charts in the Republic, or do the basic math to see where all the gravity in the sector of space was pulling towards. That location would reveal Kamino. Point being, the Jedi Council knew that Maul, Dooku, and the return of the Sith were all related somehow back to Kamino. So, of course, while the Jedi continued to operate out of Sidious's old lair, the Jedi departed for the Kaminoan home world to speak with their leadership inside of ppsw. The important duo from Naboo, Plo, Koon, and Shaak Ti, who were already in that area of the galaxy, were the natural selection for the High Council. Plus, many members of that elite body had been eyeing Shaak Ti for a potential seat among their ranks. Regardless, Plo and Ti arrived under the cover of Kamino's infamous doors. They, through very thorough and drawn-out conversations, would discover that shady business had been conducted within their facilities at ppsw. While Plo and Shaak Ti specialized in negotiations, they were instructed by the High Council to get total proof of anything related to the facility. The unknowing Kaminoans, upon their arrival, spoke of Jedi Master Sith, which immediately for these masters threw up red flags because the case got deeper. And from a standpoint, to be honest, for the two Jedi that were simply sent to Naboo and then to Kamino, it was kind of funny in retrospect. They were simply completing another mission for the Council, and somehow accidentally along the way learned that a Dathomiri Zabrak Sith Assassin, Jedi Master Dooku, a Sith lair on Coruscant, another unknown Sith named Sidious, and Sifo-Dyas were all connected together somehow. But things also got weirder. The two Jedi were obviously very cautious of how the Kaminoans would come under the influence, if you will, to create such a sizable army without the money up front. Of course, by this point, they were still picking out a genome host and preparing their facilities for such a large order. But why would they agree to do it? Well, the incorrigible Prime Minister Lama Su explained that the Kaminoans were paid handsomely upfront by a loaner provided by Sifo-Dyas. The connection? Hegu Damask II, or Magistrate of the Intergalactic Banking Clans and majority leader over Damask Holdings. He, in accordance to his own finances and subsidiary of the Kuat Drive Yards, known as Rathana Heavy Engineering, were piecing together a clone army. The Kaminoans explained openly that Sifo-Dyas' good friend, a man named Tyrannus, would be picking out a bounty hunter to become the host of the genome. Plo and Shaak Ti had many more questions, but even with all the evidence inside their data logs, including a list of over 150 executive orders provided by the Sith, there was nothing else they knew about the Sith. Neither Lama Su nor Nala Se knew about Darth Sidious himself. They did not know how Sifo-Dyas was killed or that he was killed, nor who Tyrannus was outside of the name alone. They were also completely unfamiliar with, as the Jedi were, that the financial guru named Hegu Damask was confirmed dead on Coruscant just hours before. Of course, the official report, provided by an unnamed source, would be that the Moon banker died because of an electrical problem inside of his respirator. Those inside the High Council on Coruscant had to look at everything presented with realism. They couldn't just pretend that these deaths were accidents. Whoever deleted Kamino from the archives did so intentionally. Sifo-Dyas was misled into creating a clone army for apparently the Sith, and furthermore, there was at least one more Sith on the loose. Between the apparent reports of Plagueis the Wise's death inside of Sidious's journals, inside the works, and the captures of Dooku and Maul, the Jedi weren't really sure who was left. There were 3 names, none of which they could legitimately account for, those being Plagueis, Tyrannus, and Sidious. The sole remaining Sith Lord was frustrated, yes, but alive nonetheless. He could still manipulate the grand plan into his favor without his allies. He was both smart and cunning enough to do so without any help. But it should be said that even Palpatine lamented his master's death. Not more than 48 hours after Palpatine murdered Plagueis the Wise did everything blow up in his own face. Sidious did not miss his Mun master. He simply missed the stability of a capable Sith Lord to accompany him. That presence was exactly why he won the Chancellorship. But even without Dooku, Maul, or Kamino, Palpatine could find a way. He always had, and in his mind he always would. Not far from his dwellings, the Jedi High Council regathered after all of their information had been revealed and returned to the temple. The consensus was worry. They had to be honest. Ki-Adi-Mundi embodied their collective thought, that being that this was impossible because the Sith had been dead for over a millennium. That singular line of thought nearly disrupted everything in the Force, and the blockade over Naboo, in all of their minds, was just the beginning. Jedi were being corrupted, see the examples of Seth Odious and Dooku, so something had to be done and it had to come from them. The Council was already making a positive step forward with the knighting of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the decision to allow Qui-Gon's secretive training of Anakin Skywalker, but more had to be done. As a point of emphasis, the Council was dispatching Sindralik, Bola Rapal, Imogun Di, and after this session, Saesee Tiin, to accompany Qui-Gon and Anakin on a training retreat to Tython. They didn't want this proclaimed Chosen One anywhere near the capital, because in their minds, the fabric of everything unfolded upon his reveal. If Skywalker was indeed the Chosen One, he might not literally bring balance to the Force. He might have been the one to awaken the Council to do so. This was the type of fanaticism typically seen with these religious types. Regardless, there was one point that struck the core of the Council, which came from its second eldest member. Oppo Rancisis saw this failure by the Jedi as a misstep of their own curation. By submitting to the Senate for decades, they lost not only the trust of their brightest members, but that of the population. If the Jedi were to undermine the Sith fully and wholly, they had to start seeing themselves as actual servants of the population, rather than apparent servants for the government. It was an easy sentiment to share, but a harder one to practice. The question was, after all that they agreed on, if they could actually commit to it. If the Sith could rise in their negligence inside the very capital of the Republic, then where were the Jedi not looking? They had to commit to being Jedi Knights, to guardians of peace and justice, not just looking the part. Oppo could recall times when the temple was full of life, full of color. Now it was just themselves without any banners from any planet around the galaxy. That had to change. It was clear that the Sith were capable of hiding in plain sight. The Jedi needed to play that very same game and hope to undermine whatever kind of war Sidious, Plagueis, and or Tyrannus were trying to start. For years, the Jedi would do just that. While Tyrannus wouldn't ever technically be identified by a quiet, never-speaking aloud Dooku, their former Jedi Master also wouldn't leave his prison. Dooku exhibited too many signs of the dark side, and thus the Council kept him inside his cell. And without Qui-Gon knowing of his capture, he never forced the Council's hand, which was absolutely a choice by the High Council to make sure Qui-Gon never learned of it. But like that single decision, a myriad of other choices made by the wisest of the Order made life impossible for the still in hiding Darth Sidious. Of course, from the desk of the Supreme Chancellor, he could work his magic, but the truth is that even with all of the credits he inherited from Damask Holdings, which came from the combined wealth of Tenebras and Plagueis before him, that Sidious could not just start and buy a clone war. To clarify, this was not foolishness, ignorance, nor inability on Sidious's part. This was simply being outmanned. He was one Sith with an assortment of trusted bounty hunters, business executives, and senators. Palpatine could cause a rupture in the status quo on Raxus Secundus, but without a highly influential Count Dooku of Sereno or an extremely lethargic and arrogant Jedi Order, he couldn't do anything. Firstly, Dooku was just sitting in prison, and secondly, the Jedi were actively spreading out across the galaxy to be knights. Even if Sidious wanted to stop them with his brilliance, he couldn't. Maul's personal, single worst decision was running back home to his master. He thought that he could escape the Jedi on Naboo and beg for more training because he wasn't ready, and instead, everything the Bainite Sith had been doing for 300 years became open information to the Jedi. Maybe not all of their evil and dastardly plans, but some of their biggest moments absolutely were. When Tenebras and his master created a whirlwind of darkness in the Force some 200 years before the invasion of Naboo, it was a result of the Sith, not the natural Force as the Jedi had assumed. When 8 Jedi went missing in the forest on Kofar, it wasn't a maddened Jedi Master, it was the Sith. When an important Naboo senator was assassinated 2 decades before, it was not a random bounty hunter, but an orchestrated assault by the Sith. This did not mean the Jedi started to assume everything came from the Sith. It just meant that they were more conscious of the swirls of darkness originating in the galaxy, because it was not the natural nor the living force. They kept Anakin Skywalker far from the temple and under constant protection, while they monitored potential Sith activity around the galaxy. They seemed paranoid, and the truth is, they were. Everything they had built since the dark days of the Old Republic were almost undone in 10 years. They nearly let a couple business conglomerates fund a clone army to declare war on the galaxy. They didn't technically know about the droid army, so they thought it was just the clones. The Kaminoans weren't at fault, they were just doing business, but there were some other answers that the Jedi unveiled. Tyrannus was indeed Master Dooku. They connected this because of Sifo Dyas, who was killed by his best friend over Felucia, and then Chancellor Valorum's aide, Silman, lived as a prisoner on Obadiah, and he confirmed this. Yet Sidious was not on their radar. The name Plagueis faded from relevance with the more digging they did, but Darth Sidious was still at large, still a threat in the galaxy, and ironically, but also unfortunately for the grandeur of the Grand Plan, he also was not. Sidious, for 8 long and stressful years, aged more on the outside than any other Chancellor of the modern era. For a man who, to the public, had nothing but the trial of Newt Gunray and the re-emergence of an anti-Trade Federation party inside the government, wore visible decades of time in office, which he didn't live in office. Sheev Palpatine was very liked by his constituents. He stuck to populist ideals, kept many people happy, and even though he silently tried to divide the Republic, he brought it closer. This, of course, was not the work of a Dark Lord of the Sith. It was the work of a very active and hyper-fixated Jedi Order. The Council expanded the walls of its size. Instead of 12 counselors, there were now 20, with 3 minor councils that all reported to them. The upgrade in size allowed them a chance to survey more than just Coruscant and the Senate Rotunda. It provided them with locations where people had lost their hope, because here's the truth. The people of the galaxy didn't expect the Jedi to pay their bills, work their jobs, or literally pick them up out of the gutter. People had to do that themselves. But the population also needed to be able to look up to someone. The symbol, the crest of the Jedi Order, it meant something. Every single Jedi had a purpose. There were 10,000 of them. Of course, the people didn't expect them to govern the galaxy. Those who hated them, sure, absolutely, they did. But the Order used to stand for something, and in the 8 years following the invasion of Naboo, they did stand for something. Members held testimonies inside the fully appointed Palpatine court against Gunray. Some of them went on stand and did speeches for the entire Senate Rotunda. Others were on the front lines of change every day. Every time a new bill passed the Senate and disproportionately affected a population, it wasn't the senators rushing to make things right, but the Jedi. The irony of everything was not how the Jedi Council went in like a bunch of badasses to slaughter the Sith, like the Jedi of old. It was that they left their ivory temple and joined the people. It could be as simple as participating in religious ceremony to help people remember that everyone had a place in the galactic community. Or it could be as difficult as negotiating a peace treaty between 2 warring planetary factions. What mattered was that it stopped a war. Sidious could never find another cloning colony willing to support a grand army of the Republic. The Kaminoans never gave back their deposit, and then they died for it. Plus, the Jedi were very conscious of projects started by private cloners, especially after the Kaminoans were slaughtered by a lightsaber. Every attempt by Sidious to drive a wedge further into the heart of the Republic was pushed away through Jedi negotiations, and so when his 2 terms came to an end without a confederacy, Chancellor Palpatine left with higher than average polling numbers and a solid economy, one that would see an Outer Rim Twi'lek Chancellor rise to office and face the scrutiny of the very powerful voice from the core, and yet that did not matter. The new Chancellor shrugged their shoulders and pressed on, as Sidious then retreated into darkness, having failed. The Dark Lord of the Sith, in all of his interest, power, and attempts, would never truly master the symbiosis necessary to live forever. The secrets obtained by Vitiate and attempted by Tenebras and Plagueis never made it out of Sidious. There'd be apprentices and acolytes for the Sith Lord, but they never went anywhere. Instead, they died out, trying their hardest to either usurp their master or be what Maul should have been. The last of the Sith would not be one of Palpatine's pupils following the invasion of Naboo. It'd be Maul, who succumbed to the light and left the temple for Dathomir, without any intentions to serve the Sith ever again. He would hold that promise to the Jedi Order close to his heart for having let him live. While the Sith slowly drifted from the spotlight, becoming a dying breed, the Jedi re-emerged. The effort they put into rebuilding their identity did not fall on deaf ears. They returned to the confidence they once held during the High Republic. Maybe their influence was different and the Republic had changed, but the respect and adoration from the populace was only emboldened by their return. The Anakin Skywalker that emerged off of Tython with Qui-Gon would see a far different Jedi Order than the one he saw when he first went to the ancient Jedi world. He'd be uplifted, obviously thanks to the training he received, but also by what the Jedi stood for. His life wouldn't be shrouded in war. Billions wouldn't needlessly die. Instead, the hope the Jedi brought back to the galaxy helped people learn to see the best in themselves, and thus, while the government still had to catch up, it would be the Jedi and the people, not only bringing balance to the Force, but bringing true shared community to the entire cosmos. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Sith Clone Wars on Saturday. Let's talk about this story. I wanted to do a little bit of an investigative thing, but I wanted to have the whole invasion of Naboo go significantly differently in the aftermath. Putting Plo, Koon, and Shaak Ti there, a lot of fun, but I think the real change, aside from putting two characters that weren't there, is that you send Maul back to Coruscant, and that was one of the most fun aspects about this story, was putting Maul on Coruscant and letting him get captured, even surrendering, and then allowing everything to kind of fall apart. I think there's a funny irony in the fact that, Palpatine finally defeats his master, he kills him in his sleep, and then he has to live with the consequences of losing everything. It's kind of like a funny twist, and just kind of based on how Plagueis kind of perceived things in the Plagueis book, it kind of feels like he would grow like really almost paranoid. It seems like he would be like, did Plagueis kind of plan for me to turn against him? And if he did, what am I supposed to do now? And so that was kind of a fun thing to play with. I also really like this concept of the Sith kind of fading out. Palpatine continues to try. He kind of basically goes into the lab. He becomes like a Plagueis. He starts really focusing on the science of the Force. I don't really think he would ever get there. I think Tenebras was close. I think Plagueis was close. I don't think Sidious would get there without the resources of the Empire. That's obviously how he returns in both Legends and canon, so I think without the resources of the Empire, I don't really think he ever reaches that. And so I think he would just be like, alright, if I can do this immortal thing forever, I can come back to a much weaker Jedi Order and destroy that. And he just doesn't live forever. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. Definitely a lot of moving parts to it, but I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.